is this unique product? It is far more complex than the man-made fibres. It requires a lot more attention to detail. It requires a lot more understanding. But it gives back a lot more opportunity for creativity.
In 18th century Britain, pastoral landscapes were celebrated, depicting ripe harvests, extravagant gardens, lawns with broad vistas, and fattened livestock grazing. While admired, these designs ultimately reduced complex environments into one perfect, painting-like view, illustrating man's ability to tame and dominate nature. Pastoralism is woven throughout Stowe, both within social and spatial structures, emphasizing the power and privilege of men and the patriarchal gaze. Spatial and design elements such as single entrances, viewpoints of power, monocultures, open fields, and more result in landscapes that establish hierarchies, reduce a sense of safety, lack of diversity, enforce competition, and control nature. These landscapes are made by and for men, allowing them to dominate Stowe, resulting in the domestication and exclusion of women and animals, the other major actors within the estate. While pastoral landscapes illustrate perfectly manicured lawns and trimmed foliage, they also hide the labor and processes required to establish and maintain such ideals. Grazing animals, particularly sheep, although traditionally seen as docile and passive, can transform the landscape. Without sheep's active grazing, Stowe would become overgrown, allowing weeds and meadows to overpower the lawn. However, with sheep's presence, other ongoing ecological processes can emerge when given the opportunity, such as seed dispersal, understory management, and soil compaction, all resulting in new environments and new opportunities. But as men such as Richard Temple and Capability Brown control Stowe, they diminish the agency and presence of women and sheep in the landscape. Yet they still continue to rely on these actors, not only for their unseen labor in the estate, but also their vital roles in the wool industry, producing the woolen garments these men of power proudly wear. Through this wool manufacturing process, which relies on the labor of women and sheep, woolen fibers become distorted until the final product is palatable and consumable to the male audience. Prior to the 18th century, wool was produced at a small, local scale known as the cottage industry. Women washing, carding, spinning, dyeing, and sewing wool in their own homes together. The cottage industry focused on a human-centered process. Wool was made by the body, for the body. These processes continued until wool became rendered void of the environmental and social inputs and outputs through the factory system, a system built on capitalistic goals. This British textile industry drove the Industrial Revolution, triggering advancements in technology, stimulating the coal and iron industries, boosting raw material imports, and improving transportation, which made Britain the global leader of industrialization and trade. As we move past the 18th century, this industrialization continues over centuries, appearing to increase mechanization and decrease participation. But we are still relying on hidden forms of labor through the same exploitation and power structures represented in Stowe previously. How do we begin to dismantle these power structures of pastoralism and industry, both exploiting and excluding laborers? The answer is in the acts of shear, spin, and sew. These cottage industry processes establish a new methodology of landscape design through evolving relationships and a new set of ethics, each with corresponding fashion technologies that act as catalysts to initiate mending the broken fabric of Stowe. This is a story told by first-generation Stowe women. This first act occurs at the Temple of Modern Virtue, a temple previously designed to mimic a ruin, operating as a symbol of excess and wealth. To shear begins with a pocket. What first appears to be a simple, traditional pocket that can be either placed on top or underneath the skirt is altered. Hand-sewn pouches hidden behind to store tools that we are not given to use, such as shears and knives. With these pockets, we begin to save and store discarded wool materials from the shear process, as 25% of the fleece is seen as waste products in the wool manufacturing process due to its low quality. Through this material, a shelter is constructed to protect sheep from cold weather post-shearing. Using a wattle and daub method, the discarded wool is mixed with mud to produce a structure built off of the existing temple facade, reclaiming the temple as a place of shelter and purpose. Throughout the seasons and years, the shelter slowly degrades, calling to be mended, cared for, and altered, allowing the shelter to be a living piece of architecture evolving through time. The second act occurs in the forest, a space just outside of Stowe Gardens that supports the diversity of plants and animals, yet its private governance ensures we cannot benefit or partake in these processes. To spin begins with a pannier, a structural undergarment fabricated with willow branches as the boning. The pannier is altered by us to contain a hidden compartment inside the undergarment. The compartment, along with a single small hole, allows wool yarn to be hidden and stored, yet pulled through, slowly unraveling the ball until it's expended. With this pannier, we can enter the forest and begin modifying the space through newfound ways of circulation and wayfinding. A series of trees are chosen spanning the forest, this series soon to be a part of a new evolving pathway. Each chosen tree's bark is carefully cut away to expose the inner wood. The act of girdling is then done by tightly tying wool yarn from the pannier to the exposed trees, guiding their succession, ultimately allowing the chosen trees to fall and open new passages in the canopy. While the trees gradually decline, they remain strung together to create a new organic pathway, while previously maintained linear pathways begin to disintegrate and fill in. This process continues to cycle through the replanting and coppicing of trees and the creation of new pathways, while sheep clear the debris and deadwood for other material purposes and interventions. This third act occurs in the field, a traditionally productive landscape that embodies pastoralism, yet remains a monoculture that requires high maintenance while supporting no dynamic or natural processes. To sew begins with a petticoat, a skirt-like garment altered through patches. Each patch is embedded with expression and identity, embracing imperfections, while also mending and prolonging the garment's lifespan. As we wear the petticoat, we initiate subtle and secretive moves, such as guerrilla planting throughout Stowe. The landscape of the estate will slowly begin to shift, revealing a fundamental change in the physical fabric as well as the code of ethics. As new plant communities and ecologies emerge, the acts become less subtle, shepherding sheep to further change the ground conditions, intensifying planting, and establishing guerrilla garden beds. These beds will be assembled through discarded wool garments at the end of their wearable life, creating a mound shape for drainage along with acting as peat substitute as the wool fibers break down. As these subtle moves become embedded in the landscape, they overwhelm Richard Temple into a state of acceptance. Herewith, the final step uses willow from our panniers to create living arches that establish entrances and equitable ownership to the gardens. While these interventions act as a separate catalyst on their given site, they come together as one whole, creating a landscape that empowers us, the women and sheep of Stowe. Such landscapes that were previously governed under pastoral ideals gain new meaning and therefore new names. We now call the temple to swathe, the forest now to assemble, the field now to release, the lake now to hold, and the follies now cottages, spaces for us women to work and gather. These mended landscapes of Stowe are constantly evolving, regenerating, and most importantly, intersecting at various moments in time. We see the sheep emerge in spring from the swathe that kept them warm, shepherded towards the release to start establishing new ecologies. Entering the cottages with hums of women working, we notice new spinning wheels made from the fallen trees collected the previous winter. Walking across the release, we see pieces of wool left from the washing of the scraps in the hold, collecting them and placing it in our pockets. Back in the cottage, we see the snippings of wool fabric land on the ground, collecting it later to cover the interior walls of the swathe. Our stories and actions are entangled with each other. As knowledge is passed down and between us women, the individual becomes a collective, and the collective cares for each other and for the landscape, mending relationships while weaving ecologies, traditions, and technologies over time.